Are you interested in knowing what happened on Tuesday and maybe why it happened, not only nationally, but here within the greater Western New York region? Well, we've got a very special guest coming up on this week's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which is brought to you by...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard.
The Men in Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to this Thursday's version of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Remember, we're live every Thursday at noon, and you could be a member of the audience if you so desire. We've got a very special guest today, and a very appropriate guest, given that 2 days ago was Election Day. It's Senator Patrick Gallivan. Good morning, Senator. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Chris. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
Why don't you just start off by telling our audience where you cover, what districts you cover. Remember, we're going to the 17 westernmost districts in the greater Western New York region. Tell us about what your district covers.
Well, it's unique. It's the 59th State Senate District. Unique in that it covers both the greater Rochester and greater Buffalo areas. So we started in the eastern end, up in Henrietta, and cover a couple towns in southern Monroe County, then for the most part, northern Livingston County, Wyoming County in its entirety, and then the southern part of Erie County. It's a community made up of, a district made up of many rural towns and villages, people that have been there for generations, wonderful people who care about their community, care about the school district, and I am very privileged to represent this particular district in the state senate.
Very good. Now, how long have you been a senator for?
I am in my 11th year. I was elected in 2010, took office 2011, and it goes very fast, as people say, and it took a while to learn, but the people throughout the district have been very helpful. Agriculture is its number one industry, manufacturing, many small businesses, and I've gotten to know many people throughout the district, and they've been incredibly helpful in teaching me the things that are necessary for me to be their voice in Albany.
Very good. Now, before we get into some state-related issues, tell us a little bit about your feelings on what you saw on the national level with regards to Election Day, and particularly what happened in Virginia and why you think it may have happened.
I think what took place nationwide, I think, was mirrored in New York State, but I'll stick on the national level. I think you have a lot of concern about what's going on nationally, what's going on when you have one party in control, as you have in Washington and as you have in New York State. And it raises issues when that particular party starts paying attention to the party ideals as opposed to the things that help people, to the things that people care about, and they try to properly serve all Americans. When people lose sight of that, there's problems. What was particularly interesting to me, so of course in Virginia, a Republican official was elected statewide for the first time in a long time. Even more interesting to me, among the Republican ideals would be law and order, I think, is what we look that has happened in the area of public safety. In Minnesota, for instance, there was a referendum on the ballot to eliminate a police department and go with a public safety department, and that was soundly defeated. And Atlanta, even though they don't have a clear-cut winner, the two candidates that were supporting police and supporting police law and order won. When you go out west, in Seattle, I believe that it was, notoriously liberal, but the candidate that was supporting the police out in Seattle won. And I think we've seen this across the country, and even in New Jersey. While the incumbent Democrat won, It was surprisingly close, and I don't think anybody expected that. And I think the lesson that our elected officials in Washington should learn is that they represent everybody, and they should be serving everybody and not serving the ideals of one single party.
Very good. I want to apologize to those in the live audience right now. We had a delay in our live feed, but it should be up and running now, and you should be seeing it. You didn't miss much, but if you wanted to see the intro, you can catch it on the replay. So, Senator, tell us a little bit more about some of the issues that you saw nationally that may be occurring within New York State. And here I'm thinking primarily the schools and maybe what's going on within our own local school districts, maybe not as extreme as what we saw maybe in Virginia, but tell us what you saw, maybe some other similarities between us and the rest of the country.
Well, I think when you look nationwide, what we have nationally is we have one party in control. What we have in New York State is one party in control. And I think what's taking place is you've got this particular party that's moving further to the left and trying to force their ideals upon everybody. And that's not what our country, that's not what our state is built on. And people resent being told what to do. We shouldn't have a ruling class, so to speak. Our representatives should be representing all of us, regardless of the party that we're in or the particular party that they are elected to represent. It's public service first. So what we're seeing happening, look at the things taking place throughout the pandemic, and the politicization of the pandemic, and it's hard to get accurate information, whether it's related to vaccines or masking or anything of that particular nature. Look at what's taking place in our schools across the country, and things are being forced upon people and families in our schools, despite the fact that many of the families don't want those particular things. They want, history is history and it should be presented. We can't change what took place. We can learn from it. We can become better because of it. But as a history class, we have to look at our history. My background before I was elected to the Senate was law enforcement, criminal justice, and I'm particularly concerned with the defund the police movement, with the police nationwide in recent years being under attack, with people openly calling to not support police, to get rid of police departments and things of that nature. We've seen it in New York State as well. And what have we seen in conjunction with that? Rising violent crime rates that go hand in hand with criminal justice policies that favor offenders over law-abiding citizens. And it's very interesting to me in the election that just took place this week, the fact that we are seeing people now standing up to that. And you see law and order candidates winning. And it's probably not much, probably not different that we've seen over time, the ebbs and the flows. In the past few years, we've seen people moving to the left. I'm very hopeful that this is bringing it back towards a much more common sense approach where we are truly representing and paying attention to our communities. We want to make sure our kids are properly educated. We want to make sure that our communities are safe and that people live up to their civic responsibility. And we just don't pay attention to offenders or one group of people.
You know, one of the things that I'm struck by when you say one party rule, even within one party rule, we're seeing some sort of pushback. And I'm thinking in particular the city of Buffalo. Can you kind of explain to the audience what exactly happened and maybe why did it happen?
That's an excellent point. I think for some of the same reasons. So when you have our two major parties, right, the Democrat and Republican parties are both incredibly diverse. When you go across a state as big as New York, across our entire country, people are not going to be in lockstep. So I think your point is an excellent one. The same thing are happening within the respective parties, in this case, the Democratic Party. So what you had in the city of Buffalo was in the primary, an upstart candidate, a self-declared Democratic socialist, caught an incumbent mayor sleeping, who actually acknowledged that they did nothing and they took things for granted. So as a result, we have a Democratic Socialist now running against the incumbent mayor as the endorsed Democratic Party candidate. And really interesting to see the residents of the city of Buffalo, which is largely Democratic, expressed great concern for their community. They cared about the police. This candidate talked about defunding police and alternative methods to dealing with public safety issues. And people stepped up and said, wait a minute, we do not want to go in that direction. We don't want the chaos on our streets. We want some level of stability. And they spoke up. And it was also interesting in New York City. A similar thing happened back in the primary back in June. New York City, of course, is largely Democratic, and they had maybe 8 to 10 candidates running for the Democratic nomination. And the interesting thing is that in very liberal New York City, the most conservative Democratic candidate who made public safety his #1 priority during the campaign actually won the Democratic primary, and then, of course, was elected this week as the next mayor of New York City.
There we go. You beat me to the punch there. So to wrap up, in Buffalo, it seemed like maybe there were some Democrats and Republicans banding together to write in the incumbent mayor's name on that. Now, do you know anything about that process? They've declared, at least Byron Brown has declared victory, but since he was a write-in candidate, how do you really tell who won? I mean, what's that process like? When will we really know officially that he won the election?
Well, you can't tell for sure. It seems very apparent that he is the winner. There was another candidate that was running as a write-in. I think a lot of people have relied on the exit polling to assume that the majority of people wrote in Byron Brown's name. In any event, though, the votes are not going to get counted for a couple of weeks. You've got, I think it's 13 or 14 days after the general election. That's the time period where absentee ballots are allowed to be received, so long as they're postmarked on or before Election Day. And so the local board of elections won't start counting those ballots, the absentees and the write-ins, until approximately 2 weeks after the election. So it's going to be several weeks before we actually know officially who's been elected the next mayor of the city of Buffalo.
And that's probably also true with other elections that were kind of close throughout the region. There were several legislative races, even townwide races, that were separated just by almost single-digit votes, it seems. So
yeah.
Is this...
Exactly, it's the same process. It's the same process for everybody. The written ballots, whether they're write-ins or absentees, won't get counted for a couple of weeks.
Is this closeness particular to this particular year, or does it happen often? The closeness.
I think we see it every year. I think that we see it every year that there's some races that are very close. But if you look at the majority of races, whether it was locally, we'll take Monroe County, for instance. If you go and look through all of the results, you'll find that in the majority of contests, whether they were town elections, city election, or even the county elections, most of them were not close. But you still have that handful that is close. And I think it's probably typical of every year. In this particular year, though, you have some of those high-profile races that really stand out, and those are close. But we look at every 4 years, when we look at the presidential campaign, we're on pins and needles, and we're up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and sometimes we don't even know for days or weeks in a presidential election. So I think this year, in the sense of the percentage of close races, is the same as any typical year.
Right. We'll get a little bit more into this and actually on the New York State end of things after this messages. You're watching the State of Greater Western New York Report. We'll be right back after this message.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Welcome back to the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa, and our guest today is Senator Patrick Gallivan. Senator, we have a question from the audience, and by the way, if you're watching live, and only if you're watching live, you can send us a question either through the chat or the Q&A, and we'll pass it on. So we do have a question from the audience, and that is, can the GOP retake the New York State Senate? And if so, how might they do that?
The short answer is yes. However, it'll be extremely difficult. The numbers right now, it's about 2-1, where a 2-1 Democratic majority in the state Senate now. We will have redistricting. We'll know probably shortly after the end of the first of the year, so we'll be running on new district lines. But what I think has to happen first is that the GOP has to identify good, strong candidates that reflect the particular communities. They have to be properly funded, but then they have to get out there and they have to make a case that they're the better person for the job. It can be done. The last time that we held the majority, out of the 63 Senate seats, there are only 13 or 14 districts in New York State where there were more registered Republicans than Democrats. But yet at the same time, we had 31 or 32 Republican elected senators. And so in all of those cases, especially in those 17 or 18 districts that have more Democrats than Republicans enrolled, those people showed a willingness to vote for the individual because they properly reflected the views of their particular, of their community or their district. We have to make a case like it was made in various places of the state. You see now what's taking place with the one-party rule, and people are reacting to that. We've seen some of that nationally, and we're seeing that in New York State. Out in Long Island, in most of the towns and villages, Republicans were elected. They elected a Republican won in Nassau County against an incumbent county executive. A Republican won both district attorney seats in Long Island, running on law and order issues. So we have to make sure, first of all, that we have good, strong candidates that are legitimately good, strong candidates, that are good people that care about the community, and they have to be able to work with others, and others have to have a willingness to step up and work with them as well to raise enough money to be able to get a message out. But it's a steep uphill battle. We have over 3 million more Democrats in the state than we have Republicans, and once redistricting is done, it's not as if they're going to be drawing many more so-called Republican majority districts, just simply because in New York State the enrollment is such that we don't have one Democrat who lives next door to one Republican and we match it up across the state. There are 3 million more registered Democrats than there are Republicans. So as a result, when these districts are drawn, the majority of them will have more registered Democrats than Republicans. The key, though, is the quality of the candidate and being able to get a message out. And I think it's imperative, because when we look at, I don't think, our system is not designed for that one-party control. And now look at what's happening to us upstate, how we live and die with the whims of a New York City-based leadership that's controlling all of the legislature. And up until Governor Cuomo resigned, the governor's office as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, that actually leads to a question with regards to the West New York region itself, whereby it seems that in some cases, people across party lines are banding together to maybe fight what's going on in Albany. I know that, for example, in Cattaraugus County, they passed this constitutional county resolution with bipartisan support. There was a similar vote on in Oswego County, not quite Greater Western New York region, but the idea was the same, where the county voted in favor of confronting Albany. What do you think of this trend, and is it something that maybe might bring local Republicans and Democrats together?
Two different things. First, the notion of Democrats and Republicans banding together for the betterment of their community is a good one. We need more of it. The blind party support hurts all of us. The elected officials in particular should be working together for the betterment of the community and just not going to their respective corners, whether it's in Albany or whether it's in New York City or whether it's even at the local level. And you look at the local level, when you get down to the town and village level, and I think you see a much better model, not so much a better model, but a better example of how we're supposed to be, where it seems on that very local level, more attention is paid to the particular issue than being Democrat or Republican and fixing that particular issue. So I think binding together in a bipartisan way, whether it's the elected officials or the citizens, is a good thing. For the citizens, like what you're referring to in those two particular counties, banding together and saying that, hey, we're a constitutional county. They're making a statement that we're going to stand together and demand that our elected state representatives show the same respect to the Constitution that they took the oath to behold, and put the concerns and the rights of the citizens first before they put together any particular party interest. So I do think I think it's a good thing, even though those two resolutions are non-binding in the sense that it's not a law, or it doesn't change a law or fund a budget or anything like that. The fact that they're willing to stand together because they care about their community and they don't like the direction that Albany's going is a good thing. I don't like the direction Albany's going right now, and I'll continue to speak up about the things that we're trying to improve, as I do it as the voice of the people that I represent. But in the end, the way our system is set up, I need the guy next door and the lady on the other side of me and so on. We've got to work to put together enough so that the majority of us are properly representing the citizens of the state, as opposed to some who are representing the interests of a party and not all of the citizens.
So I interview a lot of mayors and supervisors, not on this particular show, but in other media that we have. And there is a feeling, obviously, that you're mentioning, that there's concern about maybe Albany, the priorities of Albany aren't necessarily shared with the priorities here locally within the Greater Western New York region. Yet, these individuals, these elected officials, whose job it is really to promote their constituents' needs, are afraid to take on Albany because they fear retribution. Do you think this fear is warranted, or is it just something that they've been told and it's not real?
I think in certain cases it can be warranted. The outgoing governor, or the governor who resigned, ruled with an iron fist. And he was very vindictive, and if you spoke up against him, you were either with him or against him. And anybody who spoke up against them, against that administration, ran the risk of that administration working to hurt you. Now, if it's just an individual like me, where I stand up and represent the citizens, hard to be hurt as much. But if it is a local mayor who is relying on state funding or a local school district relying on state funding, or even a not-for-profit that relies on state funding, I could see how that could be problematic. And part of that particular problem, I think with New York State, starts with its Constitution. We don't have legitimate checks and balances. Our Constitution favors the governor and gives the governor, it's executive strong. So it gives the governor extraordinary powers. The so-called scales are tipped towards the governor when it comes to budgeting. Not so much when it comes to the legislative matters, but so many legislative matters turn into money matters and affect the budget. But the antidote to that is people speaking up, and enough people speak up, you can't be vindictive and get back at everybody. I think this governor is different in that nature, but people should speak up, and they shouldn't be afraid to speak up. Because if you have enough people speaking up, then somebody eventually has to listen. Or if you've got so many people speaking up and their representatives are not truly representing them, they're going to find different representatives come election time.
When you say speaking up, can you give us an operational definition of what that might look like?
Oh, very good question. I think it just means speaking up or standing up for the things that you believe in. And in the case of an elected official, standing up or representing the people that you're supposed to. So for instance, I've been very vocal about the changes in the criminal justice laws, where you have concrete examples of violent crime going up, concrete examples of people that before a judge was able to place bail on them, yet they committed a crime, they were issued an appearance ticket, they go back out, they victimize somebody else, and the pattern keeps getting repeated. So it's speaking up and trying to bring that to the public's attention, to try to bring it to the media, to try to get enough people to be paying attention to this that it's putting pressure on my colleagues who think differently than me, the members of the executive branch who are carrying out different policies, all in an effort in our democratic system to try to affect the change. So it can take many forms. It can just be speaking up in the forms of, like you and I are talking right now about things that we may or may not believe in. In the case of a legislator, it could be putting your money where your mouth is, in the sense of drafting legislation, drafting different proposals, writing to the governor, trying to meet with the governor, trying to meet with various state agencies to try to help your constituents. So the speaking up, standing up can take many different forms. And if it's at the local level, like a local town board member, whether it's a village mayor or a town mayor, same thing. Speaking up and reaching out to your state or federal representatives and doing it loudly and trying to do it publicly, so it brings to bear some pressure on that other elected official to perform in the best interest of the community.
What do you think is the best way for a regular citizen to speak out in a public way that matters?
I think it's very hard. I think it's hard for one individual to get noticed in one particular case, but they have to persevere. I think it's speaking up at local meetings, meeting with your elected officials, writing to your elected officials, showing up at meetings if you feel strongly enough about a particular issue, whether it's a town board, the village board, the school board, whatever it might be. It becomes work, of course, for people to give up their time to try to be doing things on behalf of their community, finding other like-minded people to speak up. I can tell you in my particular case, we have constituents that come to Albany that want to meet on various matters, whether it's an environmental conservation matter, a matter with the state liquor authority, trying to influence a law, whatever it might be. For me, the most effective is meeting with people within the district. But it's extremely effective when a constituent calls or asks for a meeting and then says, hey, person who's supposed to be representing me, I feel like this, and I want you to represent me this way. So I would then say, well, Okay, why do you feel that way? And you lay it all out there. Have you considered this option or that option? But ultimately, in the end, if it's advancing the greater interest of the community, my obligation is to do it. But I think people have to try to get to their elected representatives to try to put pressure on them to affect the change that best serves the community.
Well, thank you very much.
But it's not easy. It's easy to say that, but it is not easy. There's no question about it.
Right. Thank you very much, Senator Gallivan. And thank you all for listening. If you want to be a member of the live audience, you can just follow this website down below, stateof.greaterwesternyork.com, and you can receive the invitation every Thursday morning to be a member of the live audience when you, too, can ask the guests the questions. Well, thank everybody for listening. If you're watching this in replay on YouTube or Facebook, thank you for watching it there. Otherwise, we'll see everybody next week. Bye-bye for now.